Welcome to the debate. It is Wednesday, February 18th, 2026. The tax filing gates have been open since January 26, and we're navigating what might be the most pivotal financial event in the modern American calendar. The central tension we're dissecting today is this collision between aggressive modernization and accessibility. The Internal Revenue Service has drawn a very hard line in the sand this season, a digital-first mandate that effectively phases out paper checks for direct deposit. So the question is this a necessary evolution to streamline a system handling 164 million returns, or is it a rigid algorithmic wall that, when you combine it with severe staffing shortages, just leaves millions of taxpayers stranded?
It is good to be here, and stranded is absolutely the operative word. We're looking at a filing season where the pursuit of, digital efficiency is actively penalizing the financial reality of the most vulnerable taxpayers. We have new protocols this year, specifically around these refund freezes that feel less like modernization and more like an obstacle course designed to trip up anyone who doesn't fit a perfect profile.
I understand the concern. I do, and I see why you frame it that way. But I'm representing the perspective that the system, as it's configured in 2026, is finally working at the speed required for a nation this size. I mean, we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of electronic filing this year, alongside the nation's 250th anniversary. And frankly, the data suggests that strict digitization and the direct deposit mandate are really the only defenses we have against fraud, and the only way to ensure liquidity in the economy.
That is the optimistic view, certainly. But I come at it from a different angle. My perspective is that the system is currently fragile, punitive, and, frankly, breaking under its own weight. We just cannot gloss over the January 26 report from the Treasury Inspector General. It explicitly warns of a workforce that has shrunk by approximately 27% compared to what it should be. So when you combine a quarter less staff with a backlog of nearly 2 million unresolved cases and a policy that literally freezes refunds for the unbanked, you're not creating efficiency, you're creating a crisis.
Okay, let's establish the baseline before we dissect that crisis narrative. We're projecting about 164 million individual tax returns for the 2025 tax year. The sheer logistical weight of that number, it demands a system designed for velocity, not for hand-holding. The IRS has established a golden path. E-file plus direct deposit equals a 21-day standard processing time. And this isn't arbitrary. The move away from paper checks, cemented by Executive Order 4247, is all about modernizing how the government interacts with the economy. It eliminates the risk of mail theft, which we know has been rampant, and it aligns the Treasury with how the private sector already operates. If you stay on that path, the system works better than it ever has.
But you're judging the highway by how fast the cars move when there's no traffic. The issue is what happens when a car breaks down. You mentioned the 21-day standard, but that assumes a perfectly functioning agency. The reality is that the government shutdown late last year severely interrupted staff training and system testing for all the new 2025 tax provisions. That is not a minor operational hiccup, that's a systemic shock. And about your golden path, let's talk about who gets pushed off the road. Last year, roughly 6 million people, that's about 7% of taxpayers, relied on paper checks. Under the 2026 rules, those 6 million people are walking right into a trap. Specifically, this policy to freeze their refund for 6 weeks if direct deposit information is missing.
I think we need to drill down on that freeze because calling it a trap, it misses the strategic intent. This is a security mechanism, pure and simple. In previous years, paper checks were being intercepted from mailboxes at alarming rates. So the new 2026 rule says that if a return is filed without bank account information, the refund is temporarily held. This triggers the issuance of Notice CP53E. This isn't a penalty. It's a prompt. It asks the taxpayer to update their information through their IRS online account to secure a direct deposit. It forces a safer outcome.
Forces is the right word, but look at the friction involved. You say they simply receive a CP53E and update their info, but think about the demographic that relies on paper checks: the elderly, the unbanked, people with limited internet literacy. The CP53E notice says that if they take no action, the freeze lasts 6 weeks before a paper check is finally cut.
For a family living paycheck to paycheck, a 6-week delay on a tax refund isn't an inconvenience. It is a missed rent payment. It's a utility shutoff. And the mechanism for compliance is it's unforgiving.
Unforgiving in what sense? The online account is accessible 24/7. It's designed to be user-friendly.
Unforgiving because it offers no second chances. If a taxpayer tries to comply, say they borrow a smartphone, they log in, they enter their bank details, but that deposit gets rejected by the bank, maybe for a name mismatch or dormant account, the IRS freezes the funds again. And here's the critical failure point that I find inexcusable. The CP53 e-notice is only issued once. The system does not generate a second notice or a second chance to update the portal. You are effectively locked out of the automated remedy and thrown into the manual processing pile, the same pile managed by that workforce that's down 27%.
Okay, while I grant that the one-shot nature of the notice is strict, we have to look at the alternatives. I mean, if we allow endless attempts to update bank info, we open the door to brute force fraud attacks where bad actors just try to guess account numbers. The system has to be rigid to be secure. And let's not pretend there aren't off-ramps. The guidance is explicit that vulnerable groups, international taxpayers, minors, prisoners, those with religious objections, they're exempt from these freeze rules. And what's more, there is a paper check waiver available through the portal. The system accommodates those who can't comply, provided they engage with the digital tools.
But you keep returning to engage with the tools. Do you see the inherent contradiction here? We're telling unbanked individuals that the only way to get their paper check without a punitive delay is to log into an IRS online account. That requires identity verification, a smartphone, and a level of digital fluency they likely don't have. And if they get confused and try to call, the CP53E notice gives a phone number, 866-325-4066.
Right, which provides guidance on how to proceed.
No, it provides recordings. That line is designated information only. It does not connect you to a human being. It doesn't let you input deposit information with a keypad. It is a digital dead end. We've automated the rejection, but we haven't automated the support. So if you call that number hoping for a lifeline, you just get a lecture.
Scale dictates that choice, unfortunately. You just can't have a human operator for every missing routing number when you're processing 164 million returns. The primary channel has to be digital. And I'd argue that the digital divide is narrower than you suggest. Smartphone penetration is ubiquitous. The IRS online account is a robust tool that empowers taxpayers to view their records, manage preferences, and control their own data. Shifting the burden to the user isn't abandonment, it's modernization. It's really no different than online banking.
Except if I can't log into my bank, I can walk into a branch. If I can't log into the IRS and the phone line is a recording, where do I go? This brings us to the back-end reality. We're debating the user interface, but the real strain is in the processing pipeline. You mentioned speed earlier, but the Inspector General's report highlights that even if the software works, the human component is failing. With a 27% reduction in workforce and a 2 million case backlog, any return that gets flagged for manual review just falls into a black hole.
I acknowledge the staffing constraints are real, but the system has adapted to this by making the digital status tools more transparent. The distinction between accepted and approved on the Where's My Refund tool is crucial this year. The tool tracks 3 distinct phases: return received, refund approved, and refund sent. It updates virtually overnight. So, despite the staffing levels, a taxpayer knows exactly where they stand 24 hours after e-filing. They aren't in the dark.
Transparency is not the same as velocity, though. And there is a dangerous misconception among the public about what accepted actually means. I worry listeners will see return received or accepted and just assume their money is days away. Accepted is merely a digital handshake. It means the computer recognized a valid social security number and the formatting was correct. It does not mean the return has been audited for accuracy, checked against income records, or cleared of identity theft flags.
That's always been the standard distinction, though. We haven't changed the definition of accepted. It is just the first step in the funnel.
We haven't changed the definition, but we have absolutely changed the consequences. In a normal year, the gap between accepted and approved is a few days. In a year with a 27% staffing cut, that gap becomes a chasm for anyone whose return needs a human set of eyes. We're talking about amended returns, returns with mismatched 1099s, or identity verification flags. These are not edge cases. They are millions of people who will see accepted and then wait for months for approved, because there are simply fewer humans to click the button.
It is true that manual reviews will drag. The IRS has been clear that returns with errors will face delays. But for the vast majority, the W-2 employee with the standard deduction, the automated system processes the return without human intervention. And that is the beauty of the modernization. The staffing shortage primarily impacts the exceptions, not the rule. The algorithm clears the straightforward returns faster than any human could.
But the exceptions include the working poor. Let's talk about the PATH Act, the Protecting Americans from Tax Hikes Act. This mandates that the IRS hold refunds claiming the Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC, or the Additional Child Tax Credit, ACTC, until mid-February. Today is February 18th, so by law that hold is lifted. However, the IRS guidance states that these funds are only expected to hit bank accounts by March 2nd.
That timeline is public knowledge, though. The Where's My Refund tool has been updating with this information.
It is public, but it's painful. These families file early specifically because they need the liquidity. A delay until March 2 is significant. And this delay is entirely automated. It has nothing to do with errors. It's a statutory waiting period that just feels punitive to the people who need the money the most. They did everything right. They filed early, they used direct deposit, and still the system holds their money for weeks after the law technically allows it to be released.
I would frame it differently. The delay for EITC and ACTC is a fraud prevention measure mandated by Congress, not some operational failure of the IRS. Historically, those refundable credits were the primary target for identity theft rings. The delay gives the system time to verify the W-2s against employer data before the money goes out the door. And as for communication, Where's My Refund will give projected deposit dates for these early filers by February 21. So, in 3 days, those families will have a concrete date. It is predictable, secure, and necessary.
Identity theft protection is obviously critical, but notice how the burden of proof has shifted so aggressively onto the taxpayer. This year, we're seeing a spike in the issuance of Letter 5747C. This isn't just a verification request, it is a summons. If you receive this letter, you cannot verify your identity online, you cannot do it over the phone. You must visit a taxpayer assistance center in person.
And that is necessary rigor. If the system flags a return as having a high probability of identity theft, meaning someone else might be filing in your name, you want that bar to be high. You want the IRS to demand to see the whites of your eyes before they release the funds. If they made it easy to bypass, the fraud prevention would be toothless.
Rigor is one thing, logistical impossibility is another. Have you looked at the requirements for that appointment? You need the 5747C letter, the specific tax return in question, prior year returns, and multiple forms of ID, a passport, a driver's license, a mortgage statement, a lease agreement. And you have to schedule this appointment at a taxpayer assistance center. Now remember that staffing shortage? These centers are understaffed and overbooked. In rural areas, the nearest center might be a 3-hour drive away. We're creating a bottleneck where legitimate taxpayers are treated like criminals until they can navigate a bureaucracy that is harder to access than ever.
I strongly disagree with the treated like criminals characterization. They are being protected from criminals. And let's not pretend the system is just chaos. There are protocols for every error type. For example, if a check is lost, since we were talking about paper checks, there's a clear process. You file Form 3911 to initiate a trace. The Bureau of the Fiscal Service reviews it. If the check wasn't cashed, you get a new one. If it was, they send a claim package. It's a structured, logical process.
It is procedure on paper, but paralysis in practice. A refund trace using Form 3911 can take 6 weeks to months, and that's if you can get the process started. You mentioned calling to start a trace if you filed jointly, but if the main phone lines, that 800-829-1040 number, are overwhelmed, how do you even begin? The information-only lines don't help you there. You're just stuck in a loop. And that is my fundamental issue this season. The modernization works beautifully if you fit the perfect profile: single, W-2, valid bank account, no identity flags. But if you deviate even an inch from that profile, if you're unbanked, if you're a victim of ID theft, if you made a typo, the safety net is full of holes.
I see the frustration, but let me offer a counter perspective on the perfect profile. The IRS isn't asking for perfection, they're asking for standardization. The reason we have these tools, Where's My Refund, the online account, the IRS To Go app, is to allow the agency to handle 164 million returns with a shrinking budget. If we relied on the old manual methods with today's volume, the system would collapse entirely. The push for direct deposit and digital accounts isn't about excluding people. It's about building a highway that can actually handle the traffic volume. And for those who are on that highway, which is over 90% of filers, the experience is faster and more transparent than ever. 24 hours after e-filing, you know your return is received. 21 days later, you have your money. That is a success story we shouldn't overlook just because of friction points at the margins.
But the margins are where the suffering happens. You call it friction, I call it financial instability. When you mandate an online account to fix a lack of a bank account, you are fundamentally misunderstanding the population you are trying to serve. You are asking the analog world to solve a digital problem using tools they don't have or understand.
Yet, the adoption of smartphones across all income levels is incredibly high. The digital divide is narrowing every single year. By pushing these tools, the IRS is forcing a transition that actually helps people get their records faster in the long run. You can view your balance, make payments, see your notices online. It's better than waiting for a letter that might get lost in the mail. We have to rip the bandage off eventually.
Except when that letter is the only way you know you're in trouble, like the CP53E, and the solution requires a level of digital literacy that not everyone has. We're seeing a shift where the customer service aspect of the IRS is being outsourced to the taxpayer. It's here's a portal, good luck. That's a dangerous precedent when we are dealing with people's livelihoods.
I would argue it's not outsourcing, it's self-service, which is the standard in banking, healthcare, and retail. Why should the government be any different? The efficiency gains allow the limited staff to focus on the truly complex cases, that 2 million backlog you mentioned. If we can automate the routine stuff, we theoretically free up resources for the hard stuff.
Theoretically is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. That would be true if the resources weren't being cut at the same time. But they are. So we have automation and a shrinking workforce. That doesn't result in better service for the complex cases. It results in automation for the easy ones and neglect for the hard ones.
We'll have to agree to disagree on the intent versus the outcome there. But I think we can both agree that for the listener right now, today, February 18th, the best course of action is to engage with the tools that are available, flawed or not.
Absolutely. If you are listening to this, do not wait for a letter. Go check the status online, and if you are one of the millions falling into those EITC or ACTC buckets, check for that date on February 21.
Exactly. To summarize my position, despite the noise and the valid concerns about staffing, the best path for any taxpayer in 2026 is clear. E-file, use direct deposit, check the Where's My Refund tool. For the compliant majority, this system is working better than ever. We're celebrating 40 years of e-filing success, and the speed at which billions of dollars are returned to the economy is a testament to that modernization. The freeze on paper checks is a necessary growing pain to get us to a more secure digital future.
And to summarize my view, the system has become hostile to anyone outside that perfect digital profile. Between the 6-week freeze for paper checks, the one-shot nature of the CP53 notice, and the lack of human support for the 2 million unresolved cases, the 2026 season is just fraught with risk. The modernization masks deep systemic failures caused by budget cuts. If you are one of the millions with a complex return or without a bank account, you are facing a steep uphill battle this spring.
As always, the reality is likely somewhere in the middle. The tools are there, but the human element remains the variable.
Indeed. The tension between the efficiency of automation and the messy reality of individual financial lives is nowhere more apparent than in tax season.
We encourage our listeners to check Where's My Refund, ensure your direct deposit info is accurate, and file as early as you can.
And read every notice carefully.